Over to you, sir.
Thanks very much, Stephen. And I was just hesitating there, everybody, for Bob to get the recording started without the need to do future edits. So first of all, good evening and thank you very much for your time. I'll explain the top now, if I may. It's the Rugby League World Cup 2021 top. You'll see a little bit later why I've chosen to wear it. Tonight, I want to have some fun with some serious intent. And I wanted to just chat about my experiences in both business and sport, and maybe just highlight some similarities, but also to look at where either business, either sport, or both can learn from each other. So I'll do a presentation, happy to answer any questions a little bit later on. As I have a face for radio, I've chosen to spend most of this evening behind a screen, giving you a presentation using some slides, which hopefully will stimulate some thinking and stimulate some debate a little bit later on. So I'll just go now onto PowerPoint, share some slides, and let's have a real good chat a little bit later on. Thank you. So if Bob, you can give me a nod. Can you see the screen? Great stuff. So let's crack on. As I've said, I actually want to just highlight an organisation called Switch the Play tonight, which is one of my many interests. Switch the Play is a charity that was founded to help athletes transition from the world of sport into the world after sport. And it's fascinating that whilst we started this business, because we felt that sports people were getting a bad rap, they have tremendous skills that a lot of businesses failed to recognise were transferable, and as a result of that tended to judge people on knowledge rather than skill. And as we started off with sport, funnily enough, we've now transitioned also to working with people from the military and the armed forces, because again, the most amazing transferable skills, but there's some very short-sighted employers out there that tend to look for people for technical knowledge without realising that whether you're an athlete or somebody that's been in the armed forces, you've got the most amazing qualities and knowledge can be picked up really quickly or actually supplemented by other people in the team. So I highlight that because as a charity, we're always looking to raise awareness, but there are some lessons from Switch the Play in my presentation tonight. So what I wanted to do is almost share the first lesson from sport that I've applied into business. And when I've shared it with people in business, it's one of the most memorable things that they've come up to me afterwards and started to talk about. And it's known as the peak performance model. So remember, this is a sporting model, and I'll explain how I've applied it in business. So if you actually sit down with an elite athlete and actually break down their performance, it typically is broken down into four ways. Elite athletes will warm up prior to their event. Then they'll go through a period of peak performance. If you're an athlete, that's on the track. If you're a swimmer, it's in the pool. Or if you're a sports player, whether that's a footballer or a rugby league player, rugby union player, you'll actually understand there is a peak performance. Then great athletes warm down. And we all know why they warm down. They warm down to ensure they recover as quickly as possible for their next event through the warm-up and peak performance. And also what athletes do is have what's known as QRT. QRT stands for quality recovery time. Now, often that can be sleep, but often for athletes, it's actually doing something completely different from what their chosen event is. And that's why you'll see sports people play golf or do other things like that, or study, or just take the mind away from the event. So that's typically what an athlete would do. When I saw that model for the first time and really thought about it, I thought, how do I transfer this into my business world? And what I started to do was apply this model to business meetings. And let me just share with you what I mean. I started to sit down with my teams and ask what our equivalent would be of a warm-up ahead of an important meeting. And it's fascinating that when we started to explore that, we started to realize that in truth, our preparation for key meetings, we didn't understand what world class looked like in preparation. And I still see it in businesses where actually people don't even warm up at all. I see people coming into meetings late. I see them coming in saying, I've not had a chance to read the papers. They've done no research on people who are in the meeting and what their views are. They've not sat down and prepared any really insightful questions. They've not asked others about their views to get a rounded approach to the subject matter. And actually, I just look at it and think, why wouldn't you perform? And when you've got tools such as the internet or LinkedIn to find out about attendees of a meeting, what their background is, what their skill set is, the connections that you might have joint, there's so much you can do in a warm up before a meeting that is world class. But again, I just don't see it. So when I sit down with businesses now and business leaders, I actually start to talk about what is your warm up like before a key meeting. And we can really sort of spend a long time on it. We talk about stakeholder mapping and everything. And it's about the detail, because often performance is about detail. And that performance is often dictated by the warm up, not just that moment of peak performance. And then I started to have the conversation about peak performance when you're in the meeting room. And I just want to pose a few questions for everybody tonight. How many times have you been in a meeting where somebody has stayed absolutely silent? Their objective was to survive the meeting. They've made no contribution. And within seconds of walking out the meeting, they start moaning about the decision that's been made and the actions that they've got to go away and undertake. I find that incredible, because quite frankly, they've not given any credence to their responsibility in that meeting. The questions they should ask, they should voice opinions, they should introduce other people who perhaps are more reflective or more introvert into the meeting and seek their views. And I just find it fascinating, again, that there's not been any detailed study on what peak performance would look like for you as an individual or your teams in meetings. And often it just means that you don't get the right outcome. And that is really, really sad when you've exchanged a number of minutes or hours of your life wanting a particular outcome for your organization. I then started to explore warm down. And what I was experiencing and both evidencing and observing in others was often we're having multiple meetings in a day. And typically those meetings might well be back to back. And you're moving from one meeting into the other. And typically you might be accumulating 3 or 4 action points per meeting. If you've got 5 meetings in a day and you've had no chance to actually deal with any of the action points, then you've got 20 action points and it's the end of the day. So the question is, when do they get done? Well, typically they get done at night. And that is time away from you with your family or your loved ones. It's time where you're not having your QRT. And ultimately, and this is the biggest challenge I would give everybody, by you going on your laptop at 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night and sending out emails for others to action, you're actually making a mess of their life as well, because they'll start to log on at 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night. And then we wonder why people are fatigued, why people actually are in a culture which isn't right. So when I started to organise meetings, I actually included as part of the agenda a warm down slot, where actually I would stop the meeting and everybody then, if others needed to be engaged for the work to start, that would be done as part of the meeting. And we wouldn't leave the meeting until we'd got our action points out the way. As a result of that, by the time people got to the end of the day, they had no action points. Therefore, people were, during the working day, working on the things that were important. But more importantly, we were allowing them to spend quality time with their families. And ultimately, that QRT that enables people to refuel, refresh, rethink, and then come back. So I actually just offer that to you tonight as an early lesson I learned from sport in business when it came to key meetings. The same with colleague and teammates appraisals as well. Just making sure that everybody, the documentation's complete, we understand that it's a joint event, we warm down by agreeing action points, and then we go away and get ready for our next meeting, getting some fresh air, going to the bathroom, getting a fresh drink, but actually having some time between the end of one meeting and the beginning of the next. So I offer you the peak performance model in business as is evidenced in sport. So Stephen mentioned a couple of roles, so let me just mention a couple of my former roles. Sad to say, Stephen, I wasn't the CEO of Metro Bank. I was never that good. I was only the managing director, but I'll take that one. But thank you. I must have made an impression and sounded or looked like the CEO. I actually also was a business director and the national sales director for British Gas. And I wanted to share that only because I wanted to test myself about transferable skills. Whilst at British Gas, I knew nothing about a Worcester Bosch 500 boiler with a telescopic flue and a heated condensate, even though I was in charge of the business. But they didn't bring me in to fix boilers. They brought me in to lead the boiler division. So I have a lot of time for British Gas, who took a chance on looking at me from a transferable skills point of view, rather than my ability or not to fix boilers. I was also the managing director for NatWest for the north of England and Scotland. And from a sporting perspective, I first joined sport by becoming the chair of the Greater Sport charity in Greater Manchester, because sport was my passion. And as I became the exec director of NatWest, I actually wanted to put something back into something that had given me an immense amount of life skills and pleasure. And that's where my sporting career started. I made a promise to myself quite early on in life that I wouldn't be working full time for anybody by the time I got to the age of 50. And I set a lot of my goals and my plans around not working for anybody full time at the age of 50. I'm sorry to tell you I failed. I was 50 years and 1 month when I left Metro Bank to follow my passion, which was a portfolio career. And my portfolio career, as is today. And I work for the organisations there on screen. I haven't got time to tell you all, but there is a mixture of sports and business. I'll tell you one amusing story about the Manchester Football Association. I was 47 years old when I was asked to become the first ever non-executive director of a county football association. I walked into a room with 10 men in there. Their cumulative age was 761. And their opening lines were, "Son, what do you think you can do to help the Manchester FA?" Being called son at the age of 47 was slightly patronising. My answer was this, and this was 8 years ago, 2012. I said, "I think I can help you come into the 20th century." To which one of them said, "I think you mean the 21st century." To which my response was, "Oh no, I was right the first time." This was an interesting organisation. In 2012, we're still accepting cheques as payment for bookings and sendings off. Petrol stations stopped accepting cheques in 2005. So talk about being behind the times. I also suggested we might like to generate some more profit, to which somebody said, "Chris, you don't understand, we're a not-for-profit organisation." To which I had to explain that not-for-profit doesn't mean you don't earn any. It just doesn't mean you draw it out in dividends. Because we wanted to earn more money to repatriate money into more officials, more coaches, areas of concern in underrepresented areas and places with social deprivation. So I'd just share that with you. I'm delighted to say that Manchester FA since then has become the first ever football association, county football association, to get rid of aforementioned council. We moved them on to more honorary roles rather than operational roles. And sort of there are some great causes in there. Her Spirit is about helping females in particular from underrepresented groups become more active because their activity rates is significantly lower than men. And in the lockdown, it's got significantly worse. So I have a lovely balance of sports and business. But this is the hashtag that I carry around with me, because people ask me, is there any advice I can give about having a portfolio approach? And it's this that's appearing on there now. And it's hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard. That's a really, really common phrase in sport. You see some amazingly talented people, but quite frankly, they haven't got the work ethic. And as such, they tend not to migrate. So I'll give you just a smidge of a background about me. I was never good enough to go to university. my A-level results were 2 Ds and a U. Academia and I didn't get on. What I've been able to do throughout my career is become what I would term a pracademic, and that is somebody who is practical in their approach, but uses some of the underlying academic knowledge with the situation in mind. So I'm not an MBA. I'm not been university. I just work bloody hard. I care about the organisations, and I'll do whatever I can to help them. One of the things I learned, because I didn't go to school much, I was fascinated by leadership, and I spent a long days and nights in libraries reading about leadership. I was really fascinated by it, and there was 3 types of leadership I read about through my late teens, and that was military leadership. So one of my email addresses is Attila the Hun, because if you talk about somebody that can galvanise disparate groups for a common cause, Attila did that. So military leadership was important to me right through the ages. Sports leadership was really important to me, and I'll show you one of the leaders that today, even though he's sadly passed, I still read a lot about and learn about. And then there was business leadership, and again, this year sadly saw the passing of Jack Welch from General Electric, who I always thought was one of the best leaders I could aspire to be, and what I learned from. But from whether it's sport, business, or military, the one thing that I read about getting to the age of 19 was about having a common cause, about having a vision. So I just thought I'd share with you the vision that's been with me for most of my life. And I share this with my teams. I don't want it to be a surprise to them. I want people to know what my values are, what drives me, and how everybody can work towards achieving this vision for the businesses that we lead. And it's about this. I just want to be seen in life as consistently delivering outstanding results and developing winners in life. And each of those words means something consistently, both consistent in outputs, consistent in behaviours. I wanted a reputation for delivering. I meet too many people in my life that talk a good game, that quite frankly deliver nothing. And they're people I don't aspire to recruit. I pay more for execution than I ever do for planning. I wanted to have a reputation for being outstanding, so I think it's a choice. I think being mediocre takes little or no effort. And actually, whether we like it or not, results are all around us. So I chose quite early on to embrace results as a measure rather than deny them. How I went about it was important to me as well, because I actually want to develop winners in life. I want people to look back in their interaction with me, and actually I want to be part of their growth story. So ultimately, I am an obsessive coach, and that is part of developing winners in life, whether that's as a parent, as a sibling, as a child, or ultimately as a work colleague. And some people think in pictures. So for those people who think in pictures, I like to win. I think winning sets new standards. It sets new bests, and others then can have the confidence or the conviction to want to follow. The 3 hours in the bullseye talk about being able to do multiple things from an excellence point of view, not just one thing. And then the picture that matters most in my life is the one right at the end, and it's about somebody at the top helping somebody else up. So if you were part of my team and you were top of any league table, unless you were helping those that were closer to the bottom or those that had just entered the organisation, then we'd be having a conversation about what performance really meant. Because individual performance has its merits, but ultimately team performance counts for everything if you're part of a team. So that's who I really am, rather than the roles that I do. So let's start really thinking about sport and business now. And typically I'll just go through 4 things in the time we've got left, because I met a guy called Humphrey Walters who did a round the world yacht race and said he had so many lessons from that, which he shared, which got me thinking. He then went to work with Sir Clive Woodward in 1999 and actually was part of the team that set about the vision and the team code for the England World Cup winning team of 2003. And Humphrey Walters talks about what's our cause. So I'll talk about that from a sport and business perspective and how it's related to me and my career. I talk about pride in the badge, and that's why I'm wearing the badge tonight. Why would I waste an opportunity of being in front of some of the great business minds in the UK and not want to talk about something I'm really proud of, which is the Rugby League World Cup 2021, which is being held in this country next year. So I want to talk about what does pride in the badge mean, both in sport and business. And I'm going to talk about leading self. I have lots of conversations with people about leading teams, and I often try and bring everyone back to, wouldn't it be great if everybody started with leading themselves brilliantly first, rather than have to be led by others? So I talk a lot about the importance of personal responsibility. And I know a good friend of mine is on the call, and I learned lots from this man. That's Steve Davis, who at the time in 2003 was Colonel Steve Davis. And I've learned a lot about personal responsibility, particularly from Steve in the Armed Forces, which again has really influenced an awful lot of my thinking alongside sport and alongside business. And then ultimately, if we are in team sports, how do we operate as a team? And is there any models that I can share from business and sport that may well be of interest to you and stimulate some thinking? So let's start with what's our cause, if I may, please. And for me, Humphrey Walters said, people are prepared to fight for a right, but are you prepared to die for a cause? Now, whilst I've never asked anybody to die in any of the businesses I've been in, I have asked the question, would you be prepared to? And we have a discussion about that, because ultimately, again, using the armed forces as the absolute pinnacle of people that will and may have to die for a cause, then have my full admiration. But we do have examples in sport, and I just want to share with you the example that got me thinking most, and still to this day, I talk about this cause. Many of you will recognise that as the European Cup. Many of you will recognise that logo. Because when people talk about fighting for a right or dying for a cause, I come from Manchester. We sort of die for causes, whether that was Peterloo, whether that was the suffragettes throwing themselves under the King's Horse in the Epsom Derby. People were dying for a cause, and ultimately, Manchester United wanted to be trailblazers. They wanted to be the first English team to win the European Cup. And this is the part of the telegram that was received by Harold Hardman, who basically sort of said, United have entered the cup, but it's against our wishes. They actually believed that the future of football was English football, league football, which ultimately, as we all know now, the UEFA Champions League absolutely outstrips anything else. And people desperately want to finish in the top four of the Premier League to qualify for the Champions League. So Man United were actually told that they had to be back for a league game on a Saturday whilst playing in Belgrade in the semi-final of the Champions League. And some of you will know the story, but this is the story. 8 football players and many other officials and journalists died in Munich on the 6th of February, 1958. And these were the players, our captain, you know, Roger Byrne, Eddie Coleman, a local lad. And to people who I talk to who've watched United, I've never had the privilege of seeing him play, but people still talk about the great Duncan Edwards, who died at the age of 21, who played for England at the time, one of the youngest. So people did lose their lives in Munich, and they died for a cause. And I can talk about the Apollo missions between 61 and 69, when 3 astronauts died on the training launch pad, but they died for their cause as well. So I wouldn't ask you to die, but do you understand that actually the cause has to be something that is so emotionally connected, it means so much to me, I want to be part of it. And those are affectionately known as the Busby Babes in that last game in Belgrade, who died on the way home from Munich to try and fulfill a Football League fixture. So how does this story end? Many of you will know how it ends. It ends in May 1968 with Manchester United achieving their cause, and in particular Sir Matt Busby, who was seriously injured in the Munich air disaster. And the reason I put some of the names of the players on the pitch that night is because ultimately Man United's cause was not only winning the European Cup, it was doing so with homegrown talent. And actually, you look at some of those names, recently passed Nobby Stiles, Bobby Charlton, who's not so well at the moment, George Best, Brian Kidd, John Aston, all came from the Man United youth team. And Shea Brennan and Tony Dunn were brought in from others, but actually were grown by Sir Matt Busby. And is there a lesson there for me in business? Absolutely. What's my responsibility as a leader for growing talent? actually, I want to grow talent from within. That creates a great team efficacy. It also means I don't pay big recruitment fees for other people that might not actually be a cultural fit. So I talk a lot about what's our cause. And often when I ask that of business leaders around the board table, I rarely get the same answer from people who are in the same business. So one of the things we talk about is, can we agree what our cause is? Some people, it's profit. It doesn't sit particularly well with me, that. I prefer it to be people. I prefer it to be customers. I prefer it to be making a difference. So that's the whole bit about what's our cause. And I took that back with me from Metro Bank, and we wanted to revolutionise banking then. We wanted people to love the bank at last. We did a survey before Metro Bank was started. We did a survey on trust. Who do you trust? And it was really sad that bank managers had a smaller trust rating than traffic wardens. When traffic wardens start getting a better trust rating than bankers, and you're in a bank, you sort of know you've got a problem. And then we talked about what is it we wanted, what would our cause be? And spookily enough, because I like my football, we came up with the create fans, not customers. Because fans will cheer you on, fans will recommend you to others, and fans will forgive you the odd bad performance. So again, from a business perspective, I was taking the lessons about what's our cause. And then one other things that we wanted to do at Metro Bank was actually take a lesson from two men, Steve Kelly. Steve Kelly was a high jumper. You may never have heard of him, but maybe just give me a wave if you've heard of this fella, Dick Fosbury. Anybody heard of him? It's fascinating, isn't it? There'll be people on this call who weren't even born when Dick Fosbury was winning his gold medal in Mexico City in 1968. Yet they've still heard of Fosbury. And people refer to the Fosbury flop. I think he was anything but a flop, but I think what they're referring to is this particular style of high jumping. Dick Fosbury was the first man to go over the bar backwards. Steve Kelly was the man, the American, who said he would never do the Fosbury flop because he did classical high jump. Isn't it funny that what was classical then is no longer deemed classical? He sort of jumped over it sideways, he straddled it. And even when Fosbury was breaking world records and winning gold medals, both Steve Kelly and the Olympic US coach Peyton Jordan still denied the fact that the Fosbury flop was the best way to go over. So why do I share this story from business? Two things. Some people are so wedded to the old way of doing things, they actually miss the opportunity of doing it the new, more successful way. Because when you look at Steve Kelly and Dick Fosbury, what was the real difference? There wasn't much. The rules of the game didn't change really. You still had to jump the bar higher than anyone else. You still had a standing start, you still had to run, you still had to leave the ground. The difference was Fosbury saw a subtle change in the rules a few months earlier that enabled him to have a different way of thinking. And that subtle change in the rules, that in 1967, instead of having to jump into a sandpit backwards, you're allowed to put a soft landing mat behind the bar. You see, Dick Fosbury didn't just see the landing mat, he saw a new way of doing it. Steve Kelly did see the landing mat and saw nothing other than the old way of doing it. And to this day, in the last 44 years, no one has ever gone over the high jump any other way than the Fosbury flop. So I'm always looking that when there's the same rules of the game, is there just a different way of doing it? So by my very nature, I like to disrupt, because I think disrupt enables you to consider new ways of doing things. And if you look at sport now, you know, if I look at either Brentford or Liverpool and various clubs in football, they've got sleep coaches, they've got special coaches, they're doing algorithms with numbers to work out statistically what a particular option might be in playing the game. And again, looking at Kelly and Fosbury, we started to look at Metro Bank really differently. So we were the first bank to open 7 days a week. And to this day, there are very few banks, if any, that still open on either Sundays or bank holidays. You see, that was doing it differently. We open 8 o'clock in the morning till 8 o'clock at night, 8 till 6 on a Saturday, 11 till 5 on a Sunday. We printed cards in store. So if your card wasn't working, then you didn't have to wait 5 days. You could walk to your nearest Metro Bank, whichever one was on the high street, and you could open it. We had toilets and baby changing facilities. We let dogs in. We had internal ATMs and we had drive-through banks. And we were the first bank in 2013 to allow you to suspend and reactivate your card. So the lesson from Dick Fosbury got me thinking around banking's banking. It's boring, but how do we put the customer at the heart of everything and make it different and change the whole way people could do business with their bank? So that's our cause. And then I talk about pride in the badge. You've seen tonight that I've got my World Cup badge on. So let me just sort of expand on that a bit. And there's 3 amazing badges. You see, whilst I might be a Manchester United fan, I absolutely admire Liverpool Football Club. Because ultimately, when you take some of the nonsense away about M62, Manchester Ship Canal and all the other stuff that gets in the way, there are some real lessons to be learned about being proud of the badge. So there was the Metro Bank badge. I insisted that everybody in Metro Bank wore an M pin and a Metro Bank badge. Why? Because I wanted to find out if the badge meant anything to them. I wanted to find out that when they woke up in the morning, would they be prepared to put their badge on to show that there was pride in the badge? And very simply, I would say to anybody in Metro Bank, you're not properly dressed unless you're wearing your M pin and a smile. Because quite frankly, I just think that makes a real difference to customers. But I look at Liverpool, I look at the Liver Birds on the Liver building, and I look at that badge. And even though Liverpool went through a number of years without winning the Premier League, quite frankly, people turn up, sell out, with thousands, tens of thousands waiting to be part of that. You'll never walk alone. You just look at people. If you're a Liverpool fan, you wear the badge. And then, I don't know if anybody recognises the other badge. I see Bob nodding. I suspect if you're a rugby union fan, you know this badge. That's the badge of the All Blacks. Talk about pride in the badge. And if any of you on the call are being asked by your loved ones, what is it you want for Christmas? If you've not read the book Legacy, I would ask you to get your loved ones to buy you that book, because that book is all about the New Zealand All Blacks and its culture. And they talk about handing the shirt over to somebody else in a better place than when they received it. So have a look at Legacy by James Kerr if you've not. It is all about culture. It is all about pride in the badge. And what I love is one of the things in that book is if you want to be a part of the New Zealand All Blacks team, they have a no dickheads rule. So that really gets you thinking about not your technical skill, but about your ability to be part of the team and have pride in the badge. So all of that came about, and I tried to simplify things. So people said, so Chris, if you could sort of give me something very simple to talk about high-performing teams, whether that's in business and sport, have you got a simple model? And the answer is yes. My model is called Righties. So you'll see there that if you take the first word of all of those, first letter of all of those words, you get the Righties model. And whether it's sport or business, I take this model with me. And let me just break it down. Recruitment. Quite frankly, if you want a high-performing team, it's a pretty good idea if you recruit the right people into your team. Because if you don't, it starts going wrong there. Secondly, how do you induct and what do you induct people on that are new to your business? How do you inculcate them in the culture? Thirdly, people are joining you. They will join you with a level of competence, which is why you possibly recruited them. But how are you going to develop their competence? Because I see lots of organizations that spend a lot of money recruiting, do little or no induction, and then do little or no competence or excellence. Whereas in the sporting world, if I was to recruit a 9-year-old to a football academy, I would absolutely follow them through with the induction, the rules of the club, what their expected behaviours. We would talk about a pathway of both competence and excellence. And then ultimately for all businesses, I think we should plan well for succession. Now, you've heard I'm a Manchester United fan. I now preface this by saying I am a 7-year long-suffering Manchester United fan. And the reason I say that is because we all sort of knew Alex Ferguson was going to leave, but quite frankly, nobody had given enough consideration as to his successor. And that's really poor for Manchester United, because when Sir Matt Busby stepped down in the early 70s, we made the similar mistake then of not thinking about his successor and eventually got relegated from the then First Division. So I challenge organisations, whether it's sport or business, to really think about the Righties model. And again, when I look to the military or the armed forces, you get this absolutely right. And it's just a shame that people really don't think it through in terms of every step of the way. So here's just a few thoughts that I have. If I take recruitment, I start looking about what do we recruit against. So at Metro Bank, we recruited for attitude, we trained for skill. So we start then looking about what would an interview look like. And typically, some interviews I've heard about and observed are still really poor. They're 45 minutes long, they're a cozy chat, and quite frankly, the questions are light or weak, to say the least. And it really doesn't test anybody's future ability if they're going to choose to join your organisation. I'm a huge fan of psychometric profiling. Sadly, sport just thinks this is what's quoted to me recently by an elite coach as gobbledygook. To which I pointed out that have they signed a player ever from overseas while signing them on technical skill, the minute they walked in the changing room, you knew they were a real bad cultural fit. And they've said, yeah, lots of times. I said, and you've signed them on a 3-year contract. And you know within seconds they're bad for your team. If I could show you a way of evaluating whether somebody was a good team player or they could handle pressure, would you be interested before you sign them? And they said, you can't do that. The answer is you can. It's through psychometric profiling. And I psychometric profiling coaches and players to check that the players and the coach are compatible. And it's just amazing that in the recruitment phase, a lot of people guess. It's an expensive guess. Good luck. And at Metrobank, we didn't ask people to apply. We wanted you to audition. We wanted you to be on stage. And ultimately, whether we gave you the job or we didn't give you the job, we wanted you to have a great experience. If you didn't get the job, we wanted you to say things like, the person who got it must have been bloody good, because that was a really robust process. That was a fair process. That was a transparent process. Sadly, in sport, it's anything but fair or transparent, which is why we're having to bring in regulation called the Sports Code of Governance to make sure that bright, talented people outside of the boys' club actually get to work in sport. So again, I'd challenge people, when you're putting teams together, how good is your recruitment process? And actually, what we recruited against, apologies for that, what we recruited against was the values of Metrobank. So we started to talk about things like find the right people. Our values at Metrobank were attend to every detail, make every wrong right, ask if you're not sure, bump it up, zest is contagious, share it, and exceed expectations. Again, you'll see the mnemonic for that is amaze. Why? Because we wanted our values to be those of amaze. And ultimately, we wanted no stupid rules. And then if you were a leader, sorry, have I gone? Can you hear me back? Am I back, Bob? Great stuff. So we wanted no stupid rules. So everybody at Metrobank, I wanted to recruit them against the amaze values. And if you're a leader, I asked you to do the following 3 things. Have I gone, Bob? Can you still hear me?
Yeah, I can still hear you. Video's dropped, Chris.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll carry on voice-wise, and I'll close the application down a bit. But for leaders, I asked us to do 3 things. I asked the leaders in the business, I wanted to measure them against the ability to inspire, nurture, and to game change. And again, when I look at sports, if I'm looking to recruit a head coach, what am I going to measure them against? I'll measure them against those 3. I'll measure them against inspiring. I'll measure them against nurturing. I'll measure them against the ability to game change. That is bringing different ways of organising their teams to be successful, just like Fosbury or just like Sir Matt Busby and other people like a Klopp or like a Pep Guardiola. So people then ask me, how would I benchmark competence and excellence in business? So again, I took elite pathways in sport and actually broken down into all the technical disciplines, and I put this together for business. If you want to be successful at business, you need to know how business operates. You need to understand your industry, the markets, and how customers think. You need to know about your company. You need technical knowledge for the job. And then I started to then look at the particular skills for a particular job. And this one, for example, if it was somebody that was in sales, I would talk about teamwork, leadership, the ability to build relationships and influence. And then actually I started to look at personal qualities. And I give people a scale of 1 to 10 where I think they're at. And I think I give them then what they need to do to move to the next score. So if they're a 4 out of 10, to move to a 5, 5 to a 6, 6 to a 7. And we'd have conversations about their knowledge, their skills, and their personal qualities. And what we'd start to talk about is how do you get them to the next level? Because ultimately, moving them towards a score of 10 shows them moving them to excellence in their particular discipline in my particular business. So that is my equivalent of an elite pathway in sport translated into an elite pathway in business. But ultimately, just having knowledge and personal qualities isn't good. The one thing I learned from sport is the elite athletes have a great habit. And actually, I define habit as correct and frequent practice. So I don't know if there's any golfers on the call, but I'm sure in 1 or 2 shots in your round, you will hit a shot like Rory McIlroy. The difference is he can hit 65 consistently because he's got correct and frequent practice. So again, when I look at people in teams, I want them to have really good habits. I want them to have great personal qualities. I want them to have great technical skills. And from a succession point of view, I started to sit down with people and work out where their pathway was at a particular time. Not everybody wants to be a leader. Some people just want to be doing the job they're doing because they enjoy it and they've no desire for any additional responsibility. So we call them heroes. They turn up day in, day out, doing a great job, not asking you to put them on a particular program or a pathway. They love the job they're doing, and actually, they don't want any more responsibility. So ultimately, I wanted a business that was largely made up of heroes. Then I started to look at different types of people I wanted in roles to help grow my business to different directions. And that's why we coined Explorer, Revolutionary, and Pioneer. And again, we just sat down with people at a particular appraisal time and find out what their next period of the journey will be. And occasionally it changed from being one to another because of the personal circumstances. And again, that was just me looking at when I take people going through sporting academies, some ultimately do want to be in the first team, but there are times where they're not going to make it. And ultimately, we have to think of another path. Sometimes that's within football, still at other clubs. Sometimes it's outside of football, but still in sport. Sometimes it's completely out of sport because ultimately that isn't their chosen profession going forward. So that, for me, is the Righties model. So just a few more slides. So if I then move on to leading self, I'm a great believer in personal responsibility. So ultimately, what does leading self look like? Because people say, if you can give me a benchmark, Chris, if you can give me something to aspire to, then quite frankly, I'll aim for it. But if it's a bit woolly or it's lacking clarity, then ultimately I might be wasting a lot of time and energy and motivation in trying to get where you'd like me to be in terms of leading self. So ultimately, because I'm a northerner, I decided to create a model called Pie and Peas. And ultimately, what does Pie and Peas mean? Well, when people ask me how do they become successful in an organization, typically they would always talk about performance. And I used to highlight that typically performance is very similar across the ranges. So ultimately, what would be a differentiator? And if I use the example of my son wanting to go to university, he wanted to go to university with a place where only 60 places were available. There were 300 people applying. The 280 out of 300 got the same grades as him. And I just said, how do you think you're going to get chosen? And ultimately, it was about image. And we started to talk about what image do people talk about when they mention your name. So if you look at Wayne Rooney and Roger Federer, who do you think has the best image? I'm not sure you need to think too long. So therefore, who would a commercial partner want to do business with? I'm pretty sure I know my answer. The question is, when you look at performance, both are absolutely world-class and their records are outstanding in their chosen field. So ultimately, think about your image as having an impact. And actually, your image then, if it's exposed to decision makers and influencers, then those are the people that ultimately will be giving you work in the future. Those are the people that will talk about you really, really positively in the future. So I started to talk about people, looking at sports people who've got better image, and actually when they're out there on camera, they absolutely inspire people or they turn people off. And then the P standing for what is it we as a team wanted to be recognised as, and I just talk about being professional, being excellent and being admired. Admired internally by colleagues, admired externally by customers. And ultimately, that for me was the success formula. So that's why I talk about Pi and Ps. And then personal responsibilities. I gave this as a checklist to anybody and said, are you able day in, day out to talk about this as a checklist and when it comes to your behaviour? And for time, I won't get things done, I'll share the slides. But wouldn't it be great if you were relied upon as your team leader, as the others you could count on to get things done? People who didn't tolerate poor performance in themselves or others. And actually what great teams do is give each other feedback. People actually sort of do what they said they would do when you said you would do it. People who come to you with solutions, not problems. So I created that checklist after seeing a speaker called Larry Wingate, shared that with my team and said, look, if we were able to tick this at the end of every day, at the end of every week, of every month, quite frankly, we'll be able to demonstrate that we take our personal responsibilities seriously. Then let's move on to operators, how we operate as a team. And there's a great book by Charles Handy called Gods of Management. And he talks about 4 types of teams. Either the one that is instructed by the leader, that don't think for themselves, but it's the leader that weaves the web, which is good in a crisis, but ultimately it doesn't allow empowered thinking because people don't get the ability to think independently. The second one was a temple where everybody works in silos and actually they care about their own team, they don't care about the organisation. So they don't really have pride in their badge. The stars are the individuals in an organisation that think that the rules don't apply to them. And I sit there and go, sorry, superstars go to play elsewhere, team players play in my team. Because ultimately, Charles Handy said, the best teams are the ones that operate like a net, that fight for each other, that really care about each other and work closely together. And if you pick on one of them, you pick on all of them. So ultimately, I then went to see Clive Woodward speak after he'd won the World Cup, and he shared with me the England Teamship Rules. And basically, he talked about 10 things. And one of them is about the right place, the right kit, the right time, and the right mind. And that just got me thinking around that whole bit around warm up, peak performance, warm down, and quality recovery time. You'll know if you follow England Rugby Union that time, the mnemonic of teacup, which then starts talking around thinking correctly under pressure. And again, some of those teamship rules, a winner's code, as Clive Woodward called it, was about the team all owning those 10 teamship rules. And actually, if you didn't want to abide by the teamship rules, you didn't get to play for England in the World Cup running up to and during 2003. And then the last one, before I finish and take questions, is this was given to me by Steve Davis when I saw him present at the Institute of Directors. It was called Qualities of a Leader. And I just love that because Steve gave me that from the Armed Forces. And I started to work through my team at NatWest, absolutely every one of those as a leader. So we talked about pride in the badge. We talked about the cause. We talked about personal responsibility and sort of leading self. But then we really started to talk about leadership. And the one I used today in a team meeting was the chain of command is not necessarily the best chain of information. So I just look at the discuss, decide, get on with it. They stay calm in a crisis. I always remember Steve's words as somebody was running across the parade ground and the sergeant major said, "Don't run, sir, it panics the troops." It talks about leaders being calm in that crisis. So Steve, I know you're on the call. Thank you for sharing that with me 16 years ago, because it still forms part of my leadership conversations today with teams. And at this stage, I say thank you for listening and good luck, but allow me to have just one final sting in the tail. If I've come in business and I've come in sport, then quite frankly, I would never allow luck to come into the equation. So I'm going to share with everybody the definition of luck that I've taken throughout my career, and it comes from a Roman called Seneca. And Seneca said luck is defined as the following: luck is when preparation meets opportunity. I point out to everybody that the opportunity is there for all. Sadly, too many people just aren't prepared to work at it. So I'm going to finish now. Apologies for some of the technical hitches. I do apologise at this end. I'll take questions and I'll go over any points that need to be gone over.